You're standing in the back room of a retail store at 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes before open, and your manager is walking you through how to operate the cardboard baler. She's talking fast because there are already customers waiting outside. She shows you where the button is, tells you not to put your hands inside while it's running, and says if it jams, just turn it off and get someone. Then she's gone. You've got about 90 seconds of instruction for a machine that can crush a human rib cage, and you're expected to figure out the rest as you go.
OSHA has warned that unintended activation of balers can be catastrophic and that proper training and precautions are necessary. But this feels completely normal. You don't think twice about it. You assume this is just how jobs work.
That assumption is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because what just happened wasn't a training gap or a scheduling issue or someone being a little rushed. What just happened was a failure of a system that's supposed to protect you.
And the reason you don't recognize it as a failure is because we've all been taught to see workplace danger as something loud and obvious. Sparks flying, alarms going off, someone bleeding. But most of the time, danger doesn't announce itself.
It's quiet. It's routine. It's wrapped up in phrases like, just be careful, or we're short-staffed today, or you'll get the hang of it. And none of those phrases show up on an incident report until something actually goes wrong.
The part people miss is this: you don't need blood on the floor for a workplace to be unsafe. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration can cite employers for hazardous conditions even when no one has been injured yet.
The legal standard isn't whether someone got hurt. It's whether the hazard was recognized and whether the employer failed to address it. So when you're told to operate equipment without adequate training, that's not just bad management.
That's a recordable exposure to risk. The violation exists the moment the condition exists, not the moment something breaks. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because most people don't think of their workplace as unsafe unless it's a construction site or a factory floor.
If you work at an office or a clinic or a coffee shop, the idea that OSHA regulations might apply to your environment feels abstract. But OSHA's General Duty Clause requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. That clause doesn't specify industry. It doesn't exempt white-collar jobs. It applies wherever there's an employment relationship and a foreseeable risk. So, when someone is expected to lift heavy boxes alone because there's no one else scheduled, or when someone is told to clean a deep fryer while it's still hot because there's no time to wait,
Or when someone is working a 12-hour shift without adequate rest because the system can't function without them. Those aren't just inconveniences. Those are conditions that increase the predictable likelihood of injury, and they fall under regulatory scrutiny, whether or not anyone has gone to the hospital yet.
Fatigue is one of the clearest examples of this gap between what feels normal and what actually constitutes risk. When someone works too many hours without rest, their reaction time slows, their judgment degrades, their ability to notice hazards diminishes.
This isn't a moral failure. It's a physiological response. The body doesn't care how important the deadline is. Safety regulators and incident investigations repeatedly treat fatigue as a predictable contributor to errors.
And OSHA can cite employers when work conditions create recognized serious hazards. But in most workplaces, the conversation around long hours is framed as a test of dedication or work ethic, not as a safety concern. People are praised for working through lunch, or staying late, or covering extra shifts.
And the fact that this increases their vulnerability is left unspoken. The system rewards the behavior that makes the system more dangerous. Training works the same way. In many roles, training is explicitly required by OSHA standards. And even where a specific standard doesn't spell it out, the General Duty Clause still requires employers to address recognized serious hazards. Employees are supposed to be trained on the hazards specific to their role, the controls in place to mitigate those hazards, and the procedures to follow if something goes wrong.
That training is supposed to happen before they're exposed to the hazard, not after. But in practice, training is often treated as something that happens on the fly. You learn by watching someone else for a few minutes. You're told to ask questions if you're unsure.
You're expected to pick it up as you go. And this creates a scenario where someone can be operating a piece of equipment, or handling a chemical, or working at height,
without understanding the specific risks involved or the specific protections they're supposed to use.
They might do the task 100 times without incident, but that doesn't mean the risk wasn't there. It just means the risk didn't materialize. And the absence of an accident is not the same thing as the presence of safety.
Understaffing makes all of this worse. When there aren't enough people to do the work safely, the work doesn't stop. It just gets done in ways that bypass the safeguards. Someone skips the lockout-tagout procedure because it takes too long.
Someone carries a load that's supposed to be a two-person lift. Someone doesn't report a spill because they don't have time to fill out the paperwork. The shortcuts aren't malicious, they're adaptive. People are trying to meet the demands placed on them with the resources they've been given.
But adaptation under pressure often looks like risk tolerance, and risk tolerance often looks like negligence after the fact. The employer who creates an environment where safety procedures can't be followed without falling behind is creating the conditions for those procedures to be ignored.
And when something goes wrong, the person who took the shortcut is the one who gets blamed, not the system that made the shortcut necessary. This is why the phrase, "just be careful," is so insidious. It transfers responsibility for an unsafe system onto the person least equipped to fix it.
Being careful doesn't eliminate a hazard. It just asks someone to manage a hazard that shouldn't exist in the first place. If a walkway is cluttered with boxes because there's no storage space, telling someone to watch their step doesn't make the walkway safe.
It makes the person responsible for navigating an obstacle that the employer failed to remove. If a piece of equipment is malfunctioning and someone is told to keep using it but be extra cautious, the hazard isn't being controlled, it's being delegated. And delegation is not a substitute for correction.
Fear compounds all of this. When employees believe that raising a safety concern will result in retaliation, whether that's being seen as difficult, losing hours, or being pushed out entirely, they stop raising concerns. OSHA prohibits retaliation for reporting hazards, but the prohibition doesn't eliminate the fear.
People know what happens when they're labeled as complainers. They know how quickly they can be replaced. So they stay quiet. They work through the pain. They tolerate conditions they know aren't right because the alternative feels worse. And in that silence, the hazards persist.
The employer doesn't have to threaten anyone directly. The culture does the work for them. There's a phrase you hear a lot in workplaces that have never had a serious incident. We've been doing it this way for years, and nothing's happened.
This is treated as evidence of safety, but it's not. It's evidence of luck. A system that relies on nothing going wrong is not a safe system. It's a system waiting for the conditions to align in the wrong way.
And when those conditions do align, when the person is tired, when the equipment finally fails, when the rush training and the skipped break and the missing guardrail all converge in the same moment, what looked like an accident is actually the predictable outcome of 100 small decisions that were never corrected.
OSHA doesn't regulate whether a job feels good. It doesn't regulate stress or disappointment or whether someone likes their manager. But it does regulate conditions that are known to increase the likelihood of injury or illness.
And many of those conditions are so common, so embedded in how work is structured, that people don't even recognize them as hazards. They just recognize them as work. The long hours, the missing training, the pressure to move fast, the lack of backup, the equipment that doesn't quite work right.
The unspoken rule that you don't slow things down by asking questions. These aren't personality conflicts. These are system failures. And system failures don't require malice. They just require inattention, inertia, the assumption that if no one's been hurt yet, everything must be fine.